While starting a new journal can be exciting, for some of us, starting can make us super anxious, especially when FOMO rears its ugly head or the fear of messing up. Don't worry though, we're going to look at how you can push FOMO to the side and get started with more confidence. Our first technique is the one that I use for every single one of my bullet journal setups, and that's to start with pencil. We love pencil because it's erasable, things aren't permanent, and you can change your mind about stuff. For decoration, this means that you can get your shapes just the way you want them, and for headings, this means you have the opportunity to check your spelling. It also means that you give yourself the opportunity to check that things fit on your layout the way you want them to, whether this be boxes, headings, decoration, or any other elements. The downfall of penciling first though is that depending on how much of it you're doing, it can be time costly. Typically, I only pencil in general shapes or the corner of boxes so that I know where to start and where to stop penning things in. Otherwise, I'm effectively drawing out every single thing twice. It is still my favorite way to lessen any new journal anxiety though. In terms of a pencil recommendation, I go for one that has a harder graphite, just so that it leaves less of a mark on the page. So for instance, maybe a 2H pencil. This means that it's easier to erase after the fact, and you're less likely to leave marks on your paper. The second technique is to measure twice, draw once. This kind of goes hand in hand with the penciling idea, but it's always a bummer when you draw in a layout, only to find that one of your boxes isn't the right size, or won't fit in properly. For example, here's a layout from my 5-year journal that could have been saved from measuring twice. While I got the sizing of the layout right on subsequent pages, on this one, that third row of boxes is just a little bit too short. My favorite tool for doing measuring in my journal though is a clear plastic ruler, because it's see-through and it's much easier to line up carefully with the dot grid. Our third tip here is about pens, or more specifically, picking the right ones for the job. And no, I'm not talking about the fact that I seem to colour in every single large span of colour with the finest nib pen that I can find, because choices. What we're actually talking here is about bleeding and ghosting. It's always a huge bummer to finish setting up a great layout in your journal, only to turn the page and find that your pen bled all the way through to the other side. While avoiding bleeding and ghosting is partly about the pens, it's also about the notebook paper you're using too. Typically, notebooks with thicker paper are going to be less prone to having bleeding and ghosting, but some pens, depending on what you're using, are going to bleed through pretty much everything. In terms of the supplies that I like to use to avoid ghosting, I usually go for notebooks with 160 GSM paper because it's thicker and much less likely to get any of that bleeding and ghosting issue. Notebooks that fall under that category are ones from Archer and Olive, Notebook Therapy, Kumar Stationery and Crafts. I've got them all linked in the description box, but I also make sure to avoid alcohol-based pens like Sharpies and Copics. Those types of markers will bleed through any paper unless it's super heavy-duty cardstock. A recommendation for any supply combination though is to set up a pen testing page in the back of your journal. I like to make my pen testing pages intentionally messy so that I don't have to be precious about testing a pen in a hurry. And that leads us to our next tip, which is to make an intentional mistake. This is effectively breaking in your notebook. When it's perfectly new and untouched, the pressure really feels like it's on. But if you've already started in it, the pressure can lessen. I wouldn't necessarily make an intentional mistake on the very first page, that's not really my vibe, but putting some scribbles on that back page where you've done your pen testing can be a really good option. An idea related to this one is don't start on the first page. While starting at the start may be a very good place to start, when it comes to new journal anxiety, why put that kind of pressure on yourself? Oftentimes, when I set up a new journal, the last thing I will do as part of that start of journal setup is writing my name on the first page. Messing up in general can be upsetting, but messing up on the first page is a whole new level of disappointment. Our next two techniques are a little bit different, but the first one is related to when to start. Personally, I love to start a new journal with the new year. I really appreciate the kind of natural milestone moment and leaning into that by starting a new journal. But because this is a natural milestone moment, it can add a lot of pressure for us to make our journals the best they can be. If you can swing it, especially for your first bullet journal, have a go at not starting on January 1st. I started my first bullet journal on November 4th in 2016, meaning I had 2 months to get used to the bullet journal method before the new year began. This also did mean that I hadn't finished anywhere near enough of the notebook to warrant moving into a new one with the new year, but it did take the pressure off getting started. Another tip, if you can swing it, is to start in a cheaper notebook as your first one rather than something a bit more special. This tip isn't for everyone because I know that there is a level of enjoyment that comes with using nicer supplies, whether that be pens or notebooks. But in using those special materials, the pressure is also on again. For example, this journal from Quirky Cup Collective is a notebook that I'm putting off using because I want something worthy of filling the pages. It feels super special and I don't want to mess it up, so I'm holding off on using it. There will be a point where I will just bite the bullet and get into it, but at the moment, it's too precious. Can't start. Going back to the idea of a cheaper notebook though, whether you do a full trial month or 2 in a cheaper notebook, or just use it to trial layouts before committing them to your actual notebook, this can just help to take some of the pressure off. One of the best ways we can start a new journal with added confidence though, is knowing that any of our mistakes are fixable. And I do have a separate video for you with easy fixes for any mistakes you might make. That one's worth checking out, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.